All right, thanks so much for joining us, folks. I'm going to give it a minute here before we get started. You are here for the Employees, Pesticides, and Cannabis Get Legit webinar today. I will get us started here and welcome. We are the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance, and you are joining us for today's Get Legit webinar on employees, pesticides, and cannabis with the Nevada County Department of Agriculture. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance, I want to first start off by giving a thank you shout out to some of our allied industry business members for their support in helping us bring this Get Legit education series to the public. Thank you to Vital Garden Supply, Ag Natural, Grow Generation, Gold Mountain Distribution, Elevation 2477, Four Seasons Garden Supply, Rolling Hills Bookkeeping, SC Labs, Humboldt Seed Company, Hometown Hydroponics, Foresters Co-op, and Moreland Consulting. Thank you for being allied industry business members. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance, we are a nonprofit trade association representing the local cannabis industry here in Nevada County. Our mission is threefold: educate, advocate, and connect. We offer year-round permitting education, this part of this Get Legit education series of ours, as well as through our industry affair calls with our membership. We offer year-round continuing education on cannabis compliance, on industry affairs, regenerative farming practices, business development skills, and more. We record all of our education. All of those recordings are available to members. And we also offer a wonderful buddy program for those entering the cannabis licensing place that partners you with already permitted farmers. This has been a wonderfully successful program. I encourage anybody who's interested to reach out to us here at the Alliance. Our next Get Legit webinar is 2 weeks from now. It's with the California Department of Public Health and their manufacturing cannabis branch, all about cannabis packaging and labeling. And so definitely check that out. We have an upcoming industry affairs called on the OCal program, which is the organic equivalents for cannabis, coming out on a statewide level, which will also be wonderful information. And then we do constant advocacy and policy work on a local and statewide level. That is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so please tune in. You can catch the Alliance on social media, Facebook and Instagram. You can reach us. Our website is nccannabisalliance.org. And reach out to us if you have questions. There is support throughout the permitting processes and compliance here for you. And so definitely appreciate you joining us today. And know we also offer permitting support groups every Monday after these Get Legit webinars. So the next one will be this coming Monday at 3. And you are welcome to reach out. Those are wonderful opportunities to get questions asked. Some county staff members always join us for those, and they've been very functional. And yeah, so stay in touch. We offer a bi-monthly newsletter that you can go onto our website and sign up to receive via email. And with that, I will say that today's webinar is on employees, pesticides, and cannabis. Thank you all for joining us for this. We have Lucy Wilson with us from the Nevada County Department of Agriculture, who is one of the county's biologists, and we are thrilled to have her. This is a very important webinar, as Lucy will explain, especially for anybody who has employees on site. And so I want to thank Lucy for taking the time with us today. I will stop sharing my screen now. And I will hand it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hey everyone, so welcome to today's webinar. I'm excited to present this information. This is sort of a repeat of information that was presented 2 years ago, and it was a part 2 of a part 1 that we did last Thursday, on general pesticide safety overview. So today we're going to focus on employees, pesticides, and cannabis, and how that relates to your operation if you have employees. If you didn't tune in last week, I encourage you to go back and watch part 1, so that anything that I'm referring to today, not in depth, you'll have that information to go with it. So,
and Lucy, before you get started, I just want to remind everybody a little bit about the format for today's webinar. As she presents, you're welcome to type in questions either to the chat feature or the Q&A feature. These webinars are recorded. If you missed her webinar last week, reach out to us. We can get that to you. And yeah, so feel free to ask questions along the way, and we'll make sure to answer all of those after the presentation.
And, you know, this is a lot of technical information, so it's okay to ask questions, ask clarifying questions. In some cases, I may ask you to hold the question because there might be a more clarifying slide coming up on that. But generally, we want to answer the questions as they come through. So these are the basic topics we're going to be covering today. Pesticides, very briefly, but we're really going to focus on worker safety, what it means to have hazard communication with your employees, how you're going to train your employees, and what types of inspections we do around pesticides and employee safety. So briefly, I am part of the California Ag Commissioner staff for the County of Nevada. My boss, who I believe is online here, Kristen Nyes, is the Nevada County Agricultural Commissioner. Our roles at the county level is to perform inspections, compliance monitoring, and compliance assistance that focus on protecting pesticide applicators and workers. We are also charged with investigating all priority incidents and illnesses. So if someone were harmed or believed that they were harmed from the use of a pesticide exposure, we would be the ones to follow up with part of that investigation to determine the how and the what, the when of what happened, to see if it was preventable and what might need to be looked at in the future to prevent similar incidents from happening to other people. We also are responsible for issuing Sequa compliant pesticide permits. That means when you get your pesticide permit from us, it is a California Environmental Quality Act equivalent document. So we're taking into account local knowledge of water, air, sensitive species, et cetera, when we are approving those pesticide permits. And generally, we're also responsible for enforcing all the requirements of pesticide product labeling. So we talked a lot in the last class about how the label on a pesticide is a legal document, and it defines exactly how you can and can't use those pesticides and ensuring that they're being safely used. And all of these authorities derive from state law and the Food and Ag Code, and also the regulations in the California Code of Regulations. So we're going to jump right into worker safety. So everyone needs to have a worker safety program, and there's going to be certain requirements that you have to meet to show that you are meeting that requirement. So the goals of the worker safety program are to reduce the risk of pesticide poisonings and injuries among those people who are handling the pesticides and other agricultural workers. And we do that through a series of steps. There's a worker protection standard, and the California standard for worker protection and the federal are actually the same. The feds actually adopted California's worker protection standard in 2015, largely as the way it was developed, which does a lot to how much work California has put in as a state to protecting its agriculture workers in relation to pesticide safety. How we communicate hazards of pesticides to employees, what kind of training is required to show that they understand those hazards, what types of personal protective equipment that you as an employer are responsible for providing to employees. We'll talk about restricted entry intervals, and then some general outreach. One of the first things that you'll find when we go through this information with you is that you're required to have some certain basic things in place before you ever expose employees potentially to pesticides. One is that you have to plan for emergency medical care. So what you have to do if something does go wrong, and when something is going wrong is not the time to figure that out. So typically you want to have already identified and posted where the closest emergency room is for the local hospital. Typically, of course, that's going to be Sierra Memorial Hospital. But if you are in the south part of the county, that might be Auburn Sutter Face. So there's some details here about who is required to have emergency medical care plans and some other notes here that get really into depth. But basically, any handlers or employees who are going into a treated area, an area that's already treated, that's received a pesticide treatment of some kind in the last 30 days, they have to be trained ahead of time, and that care has to be planned for. You want to also have documented what your local poison control center's number is, who they need to contact from the operation if there was an issue. Simply saying that to call 911 in an emergency is not considered an acceptable substitution for either of those requirements. And then you can see in this last bullet point that the employer is responsible for providing certain basic information to the employees. There have to be on-site copies of the safety data sheet, the SDS. Some of us remember them being called MSDSs. They're just called SDS. What is the name of the product that was used? That product's US EPA registration number from the packaging, and what are the active ingredients? Those are the important things that you always need to know if there was potentially someone who ran afoul of the pesticides, because it helps to determine for the personnel in charge, who are in charge with determining that what kinds of things they're looking for in terms of side effects. So one of the first ways that we help protect our employees is through the use of personal protective equipment. Now, the state has said, and the Federal Worker Protection Standard as well, that there are certain minimums that you always have to wear for whoever is applying pesticides. So we see our example here of the guy on the right, and we'll see from the left side here what things he's not doing right. So the minimum that you always have to wear for anyone applying the pesticide, you have to be wearing long pants, long sleeves, socks, and shoes. Right, so the applicator on the right, he has potentially long sleeves, but they're rolled up past his elbow. He's wearing cutoffs, no shoes, definitely no socks. He's not wearing any kind of eye protection, and he's not wearing any gloves. And there might be food adjacent to what he's working on, like maybe he's drinking from that bottle. So he might be eating or drinking while he's also making pesticide applications. And that's also something you don't want to have, as it's really easy to then contaminate what you're putting in your mouth. Now, we keep talking about the pesticide label being a legal document. So that pesticide label is going to tell you if you need any additional personal protective equipment when you're using those products. So it's going to say, for example, if you need to wear a coverall or a respirator while you're using those products. And if you're an employer, it's your responsibility to provide all the necessary PPE. So you'll be the one to provide those safety glasses or goggles, those chemical resistant gloves, and any additional PPE that might be required. So here's a repeat slide from last week's presentation about some types of protective eyewear. Notice that we've got two different samples of a soft-sided laboratory style goggle that you could wear over glasses, for example, or a safety glass. And in each case, note that you have protections that are coming up all the way against the eyebrows and around the sides of the eyes. So this is really designed specifically to minimize the potential for splashing when you're mixing your tank applications or drift from droplets from getting into your eyes. We want to protect those eyeballs. And in terms of gloves, you need heavy-duty, chemical-resistant gloves that are at least 14 mil thick. So they should be very resistant to tearing or puncturing. You're going to reuse them. You might need multiple sizes if you have multiple employees that need to have access to the gloves. So keep that in mind as you're planning for what PPE you might need on site. And just a reminder again about proper storage of personal protective equipment. So as the employer, you're responsible to make sure that all the PPE is in good working order. It's being maintained, being cleaned after it's being used or being disposed of and replaced if it needs to be replaced. If there's clothing involved that needs to be, like if you provided a cloth coverall to wear, that's the employer's responsibility to launder those items. Those should not be going home with the employee. If you hired someone to do any of those cleanings for you, you need to make sure to communicate with them that these are potentially pesticide contaminated so that they can handle those items appropriately. And again, the personal protective equipment should always stay on the property of the employer. It should not be taken home by employees to their homes where they might potentially contaminate other places. You should have some kind of a change area for anyone who's handling the pesticides, meaning the people who are actively doing the tank mixes or making the applications. So in the event that someone becomes contaminated or just needs to clean up afterwards, you have those facilities available. And that's a requirement for any person who is regularly handling any pesticide for the commercial production of an agricultural commodity. So this is for farmers producing farm crops. Most of the products that cannabis growers are using have a signal word of caution. But if you do end up with any products that have a signal word of danger or warning on the label, then you also have to meet this requirement. And the requirement is simply that you have an area where the person can change and get cleaned up. There has to be sufficient potable water, soap, and paper towels to accomplish a routine washing, and also to have emergency eye flushing. So whether that's an eye wash station that you choose to dedicate, or having another source of, again, clean potable water that can be flushed into the eyes in the event that something does get into the eyes, be available. Things that do not meet the requirement. Hand sanitizing gels do not substitute for soap and water in this case. Wet towelettes do not substitute for the soap and disposable towels. So we're going to talk about how do we communicate these hazards to the employees. With pesticides, we want to talk about the hazards and the concerns. So making sure that you as an employer are thoroughly reading the labels. Again, the most important stuff that you can do, not just when you're purchasing the product, but also when you're preparing to use it and training all of your employees on the safety. What are the safety concerns that are stated on the packaging? Are there concerns specifically for those pesticide handlers? For the field workers who might encounter or residue on the plants after the application has been made? Are there concerns about drift to non-target plants? Other stated concerns, either to humans or the environment? Is there a pre-harvest interval on that label that you might need to be aware of? In other words, it might say, do not harvest for 30 days after the application. Well, if you know that you're close to harvest, maybe that's not the right product to be using. What is the restricted entry interval for that product? A restricted entry interval is how long before it's safe to go back into a treated area. And that's at the minimum until the material has completely dried on the plant. Or more often, the products that you will typically see, it will be 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. There are products out there that have 1, 2, and 3 day re-entry intervals. I don't think you'll be seeing that in the products that you will typically be using. Are there any phytotoxicity concerns? It might say, don't apply when the temperature is greater than 85 degrees, for example, because it'll cause burning on the plant. So again, another good reason to make sure that you thoroughly read so that you make sure there's no plant injury that might take place. And again, is there any additional personal protective equipment that is being required specifically by the label? So there's a couple of ways that we're going to communicate this information to employees. And in this case, you're going to have a hazard communication program that you train employees as part of their training around pesticide use and safety. And that they also have access not only to the application information, they also have access to previous pesticide use records and those safety data sheets, the SDSs. Generally, these are the basic things that you need to communicate. You're required to give notification before and after you're going to use a pesticide. If you change the date, oops, we ended up not doing it on Monday, we're doing it on Tuesday instead. Okay, then you need to be able to re-notify people. If you had people who maybe you were treating in your outdoor field in one section and you had people working in another adjacent section, if it's within a quarter of a mile, you would need to let them know that there's an adjacent field that you are treating. Anyone who's likely to enter that area needs to be notified before they potentially enter so that they know it's safe or not safe to enter. And you have to give them uncomplicated directions as to where they can find the information about the pesticides that are being used. And it has to be posted in a central location. So when you're presenting this information, you're going to have a designated place. It might be outside your greenhouses. It might be at a central employee check-in area where they can see if there's applications that are happening and other hazardous information that they need to know about. One of the documents that also needs to be posted around hazard communication is from the series, the Pesticide Safety Information Series, which is often abbreviated PSIS. And those are a series of leaflets. So A8 is one of those sub-leaflets, and it's on pesticide safety for pesticide handlers. There are a few items that have to be filled out and posted with that particular document. The employee should have unimpeded access to that document. And so some of the things that are going to be on there, so where the pesticide records are being maintained, that employees can find those records, that they have all the training documents on file, that they know where they can get emergency medical care, and the safety data sheet and label for each one of those pesticide products that are being used. So ideally, you have that all in a binder or a series of files that you've trained everyone where they're going to find that information. And that's one of those things that we look for in pesticide safety inspections. And I just called this out specifically. You're required to have a copy, a legible copy of the pesticide label and the SDS, those safety data sheets, at the site location where pesticides are being applied. And I say this because, sure, your product came with a label, usually attached to the container, but often those labels become illegible, either from water or sun damage, or they just flat out get ripped or torn off. And so you always want to make sure that you have that legible copy of the pesticide label on site. Most of these can be downloaded right off of the manufacturer's website as a PDF. So it's easy enough to plan ahead, print out a copy of that label, and stick it in a binder or a folder where it's easy to access. One of the things that you're going to train employees about also is one of the topics, for example, is what are the possible exposure routes that they might be exposed to? So pesticides can enter your body through 4 routes of exposure. Through your skin, ingested into your mouth, inhaled into your nasal passages or your lungs, and into your eyes specifically. And again, just another slide pulling out that information about the restricted entry interval. So when a pesticide is applied to your property, to your crop, neither you nor your employees can re-enter that until the specified period of time has elapsed. And again, that's going to be specified by the label. It's going to either be until at least the material has dried, or it will state an actual number of hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, etc. So then we also need to be able to communicate to the employees when actual applications have taken place. So this is referred to as application-specific information display for handlers. This is how, when, for example, an employee shows up to work for the day and they've been trained to go to a specific spot that has all the application information on it, and they can see if a field or a greenhouse is safe to enter. So for example, you got up in the morning and you made a pesticide application early in the day while it was cool, and then you left to run errands in town. Your employee shows up, can't find you, but they know that they've been trained to go and look for this information to verify that it's safe to enter a specific area. And so they would go to the board or wherever you have this information kept, and they would look and see, oh, I see that you made a pesticide application this morning that you finished at 10 o'clock, and it's a 2-hour reentry interval. Well, it's after 2 hours would have been 12 o'clock, and it's 1 o'clock now, so it should be safe for me to go in. So we have certain items that have to be posted as part of this application-specific information display. And as you might have gathered from the example I just gave, that we want to know the exact crop area that was treated. So was it greenhouse 1? Was it row 1? Was it the whole area? What date and time did it start and finish? What is that restricted entry interval? What product was used, along with its EPA registration number and the active ingredients? And that they know where to find the safety data sheets of the pesticide that was applied. This application-specific information you're required to maintain for 2 years. And you'll hear that again and again. Everything that's pesticide related, you're required to keep a copy of it for 2 years. That's your pesticide permit, pesticide applications, employee safety training records, etc. It's all 2 years. And similar to the PSIS A8 that we talked about that was for the pesticide handlers, there is a similar document specifically for field workers. And so that form would also be filled out and posted if there's field workers involved. Again, it has to be at the work site, at a central location. If there's any changes to that, they have to be updated promptly. So that was a lot of information about hazard communication. I'm going to pause and take a sip of water and see if there's any questions.
And I'll just remind folks that they can type their questions into either the chat feature or the Q&A feature at any point in time.
So far we've talked about some of the requirements around employees' safety with pesticides. Now we're going to talk about how we're going to train the employees. So with employees, we have pesticide handlers and field workers. Training is required for all types of employees that are going to come in contact with pesticides, either directly or indirectly. A handler is defined as an employee that mixes the tanks, loads the pesticide, or applies the pesticide. It could also be someone who repairs or cleans equipment that was used for pesticide application. And anyone who's touching unrinsed pesticide containers. And so the commonality amongst these 3 different scenarios is that this person has the potential to come into direct exposure with concentrated amounts of pesticides. So there's an increased risk of direct exposure for pesticide handlers, as opposed to a field worker who's more broadly defined as anyone, including contract labor, that works on a farm or in a greenhouse or a nursery, who's working in that treated area within 30 days of a pesticide application. And I see a quick question here. Will this be available to rewatch at a later date? Yes, they're all recorded.
Yeah, and I will just say, for all of the Get Legit webinars, we actually have the Alliance has a fabulous partnership now with Nevada County Media. And so you can, through Nevada County Media, we now have a YouTube playlist in which everybody can find the Get Legit recordings.
Okay, so because there's a difference between handlers and field workers, and because there is an increased risk with pesticide handlers having a higher risk of exposure, they have to have a written training program. And so here it stipulates, so it has to be in the written training program. You're going to have your things like your pesticide safety information sheets that go over things like storing of pesticides in agricultural settings, first aid and decontamination, working safely with pesticides, right? Nice basic overview. So the Pesticide Safety Information Series, that's going to be a real go-to for both your study material when you're studying to be a qualified trainer, and also to use those same documents when you're training your employees. You're going to have the copies of those safety data sheets. You're going to have copies of the pesticide label. If you find any other materials, books that talk about pesticide safety, videos, you're welcome to use those as well. And you're using this information and documenting what resources you're using in your program. And when I talk about these documents, know that we have all the forms that you need, and we'll walk you through how to fill out those documents. Again, when you set up your training program and those written documents, you're going to maintain that for 2 years. We talked about a little bit already about the Pesticide Safety Information Series. These are leaflets that have been produced by our big sister state agency, the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And they're written to address all types of pesticide use with all different types of agriculture in the state. So some of them are not going to be applicable, but you can see again here, it reviews how to do the hazard communication, first aid, medical supervision, pesticide handler safety, pesticide storage and transport, protective equipment, and respiratory protection. And just so that you know, if it comes up, they are available currently in 3 languages. Friends EPR's website, English, Spanish, and Punjabi. So the basics of the handler training. All employees have to be trained before they handle pesticides. You would have to update the training if you started using a new pesticide that they had not previously been trained on. And you have to repeat the training every year, every 12 months thereafter the first training. There is a case that the initial training could be waived if the employee can show a record that they have been trained in a on similar chemicals in the past. You would still have to make sure that they are aware of all the hazards on your particular farm. So it's not a complete waiving, it's just a partial waiving potentially of some of the requirements of training by you. And then again, the employers are required to record the date of the training, and you will collect the employee's signature on that to show that they have been trained and verified, and keep those records. Again, you're going to hear this over and over again for 2 years. It's going to be a pop question quiz at the end, 2 years. So we talked about handlers and the fact that they have that higher potential risk for directly handling the pesticides. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about field workers. And that a field worker, again, is anyone who's working in a treated area in the last 30 days. So again, they have to be trained before potential prior exposure. So if you've made a pesticide application and you have the employees on site as a new hire, and it's been within 30 days since you made that application, you have to train them before they can go into that treated area. The training for field workers is much more simplified. It's basically 2 pages of actual forms that you have to complete but then you have all your supporting documents, like going through those PSIS sheets with the employees to go over all the required topics. It's basically a page of topics that you have to cover with them. And those trainings are going to include the possible health effects from exposure to residue and general pesticide safety. You know, where are the pesticides stored? How are they disposed of? Where are the hazard communication documents, right? All those basic pesticide safety items. If you have a pesticide that says on the label that you need some type of a respirator, whether that's an N95 or a half or full respirator with cartridges, if you're going to have employees that are wearing those respirators, then you also need to develop a respiratory protection written program and meet certain requirements. So again, this is for a required use of a respirator. So the label says you have to wear it as part of your safety equipment, then you have to wear it. It doesn't apply to employees who are voluntarily wearing dust masks, painter's masks, COVID masks. And the requirement is not there, again, if it's a voluntary use or if it's being provided by the employee. If the employer wants to allow an employee to wear a respirator when it's not actually mandated or required by the pesticide label, for example, then there is a voluntary respirator posting that you would require the employee to read and acknowledge that basically says that they are voluntarily wearing it, there's no required use of wearing it, and they're responsible for maintaining their equipment to standard and using it correctly. So a little more on the respiratory protection and what's required. Employees who are going to wear respirators as a requirement, they have to be medically evaluated. This is a website questionnaire that's maintained by 3M Corp, who makes most of the respirators. And basically, the employee would log on to the web or go to the website and complete a questionnaire that's going to ask HIPAA protected information about any health conditions that they might have that would affect them with the ability to actually wear and use a respirator correctly and safely. Once they complete that questionnaire, they'll be printed a certificate that they can hand to you, the employer, so that their HIPAA protected information stays protected, but they can show you that they went through the evaluation and whether or not they are going to be okay to wear a respirator or not. That then document then goes in their file along with their other fit test records that you would also have to make sure that the respirator is fitting their face correctly and is being worn correctly. That one does have a site requirement, 3 years for that particular item for respirator safety. And then there's some basic requirements for required use of respirators that you as the employer would have to make sure are always happening. You're going to make sure that there's, you're going to maintain routine use of the respirators. You're going to maintain emergency or second use respirators to ensure if you are using like scuba type equipment with oxygen containers. You're going to look over all of your emergency use respirator every month. So you can see there's a lot of extra information here and requirements if there's going to be respirators involved. And when I go over your permits with you, if there's a product that comes up that requires the use of a respirator, often the simplest thing is for the owner operator to be the one to handle and make those pesticide applications. Or again, we do have the extra documents and can help walk you through meeting all the safety requirements of the respiratory program. Can you require this evaluation before hiring? I'm not entirely certain about that. If they can pass the respirator exam or the questionnaire, possibly. That's a liability question I've never been asked before. I'll make a note of that. And if you send me if you want me to follow up, put it in the chat notes. We'll capture your information and I'll get an answer and get it back to you. Again, respirator storage, just like your other personal protective equipment, you want to make sure that they are protected. Respirators, you need a little bit more protection. You want to make sure that they're protected from heat, damage, contamination, dust, sunlight, excessive moisture, potentially other damaging chemicals. They have to be stored in a manner that prevents the face piece and the exhalation valve from deformation. Okay. So this is the part everyone gets excited about, how to be a qualified trainer, AKA taking the private applicator exam. There are a few different people who are considered to be qualified as trainers, and I've highlighted the top two because they're the most relevant to you as farmers, but really the standard that most farmers use to become a qualified trainer is option number 2, to get a California certified private applicator certificate. And so to get that certificate, you take the private applicator exam. It's administered by the county ag department, by me. The exam is 70 multiple choice questions. And the questions cover a variety of pesticide safety topics, including understanding the pesticide label, mixing and application questions, and general safety knowledge. And I always say at the beginning of the exam, there's going to be a few oddball questions in there that you're going to say, Lucy did not cover that in any of the study materials that we read through. And that's true. There's a few industry-specific questions in there. There's one very specific for beekeeping and kind of beekeeping safety. There's some more specific ones in there that are weather-related. But my point is you have to pass with a score of at least 70%, which means you can miss up to 21 questions out of 70 questions and still have a passing score. So as long as you have read through the information and you have this general understanding of what the terminology means when we refer to a handler versus a field worker, what is mandatory personal protective equipment, what are the basics that you have to ensure for employee safety with pesticides, it's more than likely that you're gonna have no problem passing the exam. And when I work with you issuing your pesticide permit and talking about the qualified trainer requirements, I make sure that you get these handouts, the Pesticide Safety Information Series. There's the Read the Label handout that again just talks about what you'll find on the pesticide label. How to Calibrate handout. There are extra books if you really want to dig into this subject that you can sometimes borrow from the library or you can purchase online. I think and even read as a PDF now that you can purchase online electronically. See, we have a question. Can we require the respirator evaluation before hiring? So Elise, I'm going to ask Maggie and Diana to help capture that information, and I will get back to you with an answer on that. It may be an HR type question, and so I may or may not have that answer. It may be something that you would have to ask someone who's a hiring specialist. Let me put it that way. But I'll see what I can find out for you on that.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us here at the Alliance, Elise, and we can help look into it also. All right, so as part of our role as pesticide safety enforcement, we do inspections and there is an enforcement element. So as much as we try to participate in events like this and have one-on-one meetings as you're going through your application process, and we use an annual renewal pesticide permit process to have the opportunity to check in with you every year. And we do our best to do outreach and education. We do still have that enforcement element. At the end of the day, our goal is for pesticide use and safety and preventing injury
unnecessarily. And so there is also that enforcement element in place. So again, through state laws and regulations, we have the authority to perform these types of inspections to confirm that compliance is being met. We also have authority to perform different types of investigations, issuing the permits, ensuring pesticide safety and water protection. And again, that goal is always compliance with the state laws and regulations. We try to get the compliance through the education and outreach, but we also have the enforcement possibility. And enforcement actions can range from a written violation notice to fines being assessed, depending on the severity, the frequency, and the previous history of similar violations. So one of the types of inspections that would be specific to employees would be field worker safety inspection. So this would take place anytime within 30 days that an application was made. We would confirm that you have a current pesticide permit. We would verify that you have those hazard communication documents, those PS A8 and A9 posted as relevant to pesticide handlers and field workers, confirm that they're complete, that the emergency medical care is posted, etc. We would verify the document field size, the types of field worker activities. If we would ask to talk to people who are field workers, just to have a quick chat with them to see if they have any concerns that they might want to share with us directly. We'd make sure that the pesticide name, the EPA registration number, the signal word of the product, and any required personal protective equipment was present and available. We would confirm the presence of your decontamination materials, that potable water, soap, and paper towels that are available in the event of someone needs to decontaminate themselves if they were inadvertently contaminated due to drift or accidentally entering an area before it was safe to re-enter. Another type of safety inspection that we would perform is a pesticide use monitoring inspection. So we might arrange that if you know you're going to be making a pesticide application, that we can be on site to observe that happening. So we could either watch you mixing the tanks and or actually making the application. And that helps us to determine that pesticide handlers and employee compliance is in place, that all conditions of the permit are being met, the terms of the pesticide label requirements are being met, that people have been trained, and that people are working safely. It can confirm whether the pesticide handler and the employer are mitigating any possible hazards to people, to non-target animals, non-target plants or property, and allows us potentially to confirm the ability to correctly identify the pesticide and determine that the compliance of the status of the label requirements as to the site that's being used on, the crop that's being used on, the dilution rates, and that everything is being handled correctly. And the other type that you will see with pesticide involved with employees, although this can apply to any operation, is what's called a headquarters inspection. And this is where we're looking more specifically over the actual documents that are related to your operation. So do you have a current pesticide permit? Are you retaining all of those pesticide documents for 2 years? Do you have your training documents in place? Do you have a qualified trainer and a written training program if you have pesticide handlers? Do you have your hazard communication document posted, respiratory program, planned emergency medical care? Do you have a change area with water, soap, and paper towels? How are you storing your PPE? Is it clean and good repair, ready to be used for the next time, that's staying on the property? And that your pesticide storage is securable. Your containers all have labels on them. That if you are using any type of a service container, which would be a container in which you have sort of a temporary and a smaller amount of a pesticide, that has the required container labeling, and it never held food. It's not an obvious food container. And that if you have products that have signal words of warning or danger on those pesticides, that you have a sign outside posted that says danger, peligro, basically there's pesticides here. So we're close to the end of the presentation here. So again, just our key points. There needs to be training. You're going to have a training program with your field workers and handlers. You need to maintain your written training documents. You need to train your employees. You're going to document by maintaining all of your necessary hazard communication documents. You're going to provide and maintain all the necessary personal protective equipment in decontamination facilities. And you're going to follow that label because, again, you guys can all join in with me as we say it. The label of a pesticide is a legal document that defines how you can use the product and all the safety requirements. So there we have it. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Lucy. That's such great information. If folks have questions, please type them into the chat feature or the Q&A. I see one just came in. Oh, thanks, Chris. So this says, regarding the question about requiring the valuation before hiring, for Elise's question, you could potentially require this, but it is the employer's responsibility to identify a physician or other licensed healthcare professional to perform a medical evaluation. So a random medical evaluation would not suffice. So hopefully that's some helpful information for there. Thank you so much, Chris. I just want to remind everybody that this has been recorded and all of our Get Legit webinars can be found through Nevada County Media on YouTube. There is now a Nevada County Cannabis Alliance playlist through Nevada County Media. And this one will be added to that in just a couple days from now. And also just to remind folks, they can reach out to the Agricultural Department at any time, to Lucy, as well as her cohorts with questions. And here's a question for you, Lucy. Relating to washing employees as well as cleanup of packaging, what is protocol for where the waste ends up? If I am correct from my education, it is okay for product from cleaning to be applied to the field?
Yeah, so we touched on that more last week when we were talking about general pesticide safety, and we talked about triple rinse procedures when you're at the end of a pesticide container, for example, and this would similarly apply. The goal is that, for example, with products specifically, that you are, you're putting the last of your product in the container, you're adding more water to the original pesticide container, drain, you're doing that 3 times. So 2 times, the 3rd time, you're holding that container at an angle for 30 seconds. So you're letting all of that residue be mixed with the water and hopefully rinse into your tank mix, okay? And then you would dispose of that container. A best management practice with that would be to go ahead and puncture the container so that it can't be used to hold any other fluids later, especially meaning you can inadvertently put drinking water in it and have someone still potentially exposed to some residue from that container. And so similarly, yeah, your decontamination sites would ideally be a site where you can, collect that contaminant or be rinsed off in the field where the application took place. Or if nothing else, it's on a surface that's not going to allow runoff off of where you had your mix and load site. So when you have your mix and load site, for example, you don't want to be adjacent to a creek or other water source, so you're potentially contaminating like a wellhead, where any runoff is potentially contaminating that water source. So yeah, if you do have the need for the decontamination site for the employees, you want to kind of keep that where your mixing area is or at the field. Do these requirements apply to compost teas being sprayed on plants? No, this is pesticide specific. Teas are generally considered micronutrient applications, so therefore a kind of a subset of fertilizers. You're typically not directly controlling a pest with a tea, a brew, but you might want to have some of the same general kind of safety guidelines, at least for as it pertains to trying to maximize getting all the product onto your plants, making sure it's not ending up somewhere where it doesn't belong, like a water source. It's just the best management practice.
Great. if there are any more questions from the audience, now is the moment. And Lucy, can you just remind people the process to schedule with you to take the exam?
Yeah, so if you have submitted your application to the county, when I review those documents and I see that you have employees identified, as part of those items that we will set up to talk about in a meeting, we'll talk about your pesticide list. We would talk about, we would issue your pesticide permit, and then we would talk about the fact that you need to be a qualified trainer. And so that becomes a conditional item on your permit before you would be finally approved with your ACP. So at that point, we've already kind of gone through the process, and you know that you need to take the exam. I will have given you those study materials that we talked about are identified if you don't have those already. And then when you're ready, we would set a date. And typically I'm offering the exam every 1 to 2 weeks right now in sort of small group settings. And so for example, there's actually one on next Friday, May 21st. It's currently full. I could start a very small waiting list for that. And I already have another next exam date available for Friday, June 4th. And so if you're interested in that, you would let me know. If this is more in the future and you're ready to take the exam, again, I just kind of constantly on a rotating basis, setting up another exam opportunity every 1 to 2 weeks on an as needed basis for however many people are needing to take the exam at that time.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucy. Does the exam have a cost to it?
No, it doesn't. Yay, one of those things that doesn't have a cost associated with it. No, the exam is free. I administer the exam. It's in person. We use a Scantron. I hand grade the Scantrons. You know right away if you passed or not. The only penalty involved if you don't pass the first time, maybe you're not a good test taker, or you're anxious, or you didn't get as much studying done. Life happened and you're just tired. The baby is crying all night. You know, don't worry about it. You have to wait 7 days before you can take the exam again. So that's the only penalty involved. But you can take the exam as many times as you need to pass the exam. Most folks, if they don't pass it the first time through, they pass it the second time through. You know, you've seen the questions, you're more comfortable with the situation, you got a better night's sleep. You know, usually, like I said, most folks will pass it just fine the second time if they didn't pass it the first time.
Awesome. Great. Well, I just want to reiterate to folks, feel free to reach out to us here at the Alliance if you are looking for the study materials, if you are trying to find the recordings. They are all available on YouTube now through the Nevada County Media. We have our own Alliance playlist there, so check those out. Both of Lucy's webinars now will be up there, as well as some others. And Lucy, I just want to say thank you so much again for taking the time with us. This is really invaluable information. And I hope I'm very happy to hear that you have a full class next week to take the test. Hope that keeps up. And with that, I think I will give us all the rest of our Thursday back. And just thank you again. And please feel free to reach out to the County Ag Department anytime with questions. Feel free to reach out to us here at the Alliance. There is support for you in whatever facet you need. And check out this coming Monday's permitting support group if you need extra assistance with anything. Help is here for you. So thank you again, Lucy, and thanks everybody for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.